My name is Jerm. This is Jerm Warfare, the battle of ideas. He spent 21 years in the Royal Navy, tracking Soviet submarines during the Cold War, and since leaving the service, if memory serves, he turned his attention to what I would describe as a very different threat, and one that is hiding in plain sight all around us, actually. And he's the co-founder of UK Column. I've waited quite a long time to get him on my show. He doesn't remember the last time he was on. And Brian Gerrish, thank you for joining me in the trenches finally.
Jerm, it's a pleasure. It's an absolute pleasure. And I'll just say that I'm sorry you had to wait so long. It wasn't deliberate. Sometimes things only happen when the time's right. So I've got a feeling that this discussion will be a lot better today because we've waited. We can see how we go.
Yes, I mean, you are an iconic figure in the alternative media. I came across, UK Column effectively during the COVID era, and I think that probably applies to a lot of people. It was a very strange time, wasn't it?
It was a very strange time. And I have to say that I was stunned at how deeply it affected people. And one of the most poignant ways that we, the UK Column team, get reminded of this is if we've gone to a live event. It's normal that people come up to us and they want a selfie or they say, can I have a hug? But out of those people, there will always be a number who will say, I found you during lockdown. And then they say, you kept me sane. That's not just Brian Gerrish, that's the team. And some of them say, I was in a very dark place. And if I hadn't found you, I'm not sure what I would have done. And we know what they're talking about. So these were people that were in a very, very bad, dark place during lockdown. And I don't think any of us should underestimate how bad that period was.
Knowing what has unfolded over the last few years, would you go back to 2019?
Well, no. No, I wouldn't know. I think like a lot of people, we went through that, we did it, but I don't think I'd want to go back. And also we've learned so much from going through it because I think they gave us a very good look at where they want to take society. We were given a look into the future, a feel for what it would be to be totally controlled with the state, locked in your house, locked into a bubble, denied the ability to see relatives. This is, in my opinion, what a fully totalitarian, technocratic state will look like.
I mean, before we even discuss anything, my question is, are you hopeful?
I'm hopeful. Well, actually, I'm going to say I'm not hopeful because hope is a little bit of a weak thing, isn't it? How do I look at the future? Well, we're in a battle. I'm pretty sure the right people are going to win it. But what we mustn't do is feel that this battle is an easy battle to win and that we're going to win it in a short space of time. I think all of us at some stage have got into this. We've woken up and we're fighting. And we tend to think in terms of winning, maybe that's in 5 years or 10 years. But now I think actually the battle is so big that it's going to be a very long time before it's won. So I don't think of it in so much now in terms of a purely political solution, which most people would imagine, I think, could happen, in this time scale of 5 or 10 years, maybe longer. I think we're in a battle that is actually going to be won when a generation has changed. Maybe it's 2 generations. So what's happening around us is very, very powerful. It's very dark. And most people who follow me through the UK column will know that I believe it's a spiritual battle, which I do. And then if you say it's a spiritual battle, it makes more sense that thinking in terms of mere mortals and elections doesn't really cut it.
My show, which of course is now part of UK Column, plays very much into the metaphor of the battle of ideas and information war and the minefield around us and all that. But when you talk about the information war, what are you talking about?
Well, I believe that at the moment we're in a battle, the battle is for our minds. And of course, our minds are designed to suck up information by what we see and hear and read and watch. And so the information war for me is very much the fact that information is being fed to us, which is extremely powerful and harmful. But we've also now got to the situation where information is being denied to us. We're being kept in the dark. We're being attacked, but we can't actually see or feel what's attacking us. And the other thing we've got to pay attention to is actually how information is put across, because whilst we could look at the TV screen, which I don't, but we could look at the TV screen, or we could be listening to the radio, and we think in terms of people are talking and telling us things. But we now know without any doubt that governments around the world, particularly the UK government, because I believe it leads in it, is using applied psychology to manipulate the language it uses, to the extent that the British government's been able to boast that it's able to change the way people think and behave, and people will not necessarily know their behaviour's changed, or if they realise their behaviour's changed, they won't know exactly how that change was made. So this is very, very powerful application of behavioural psychology. And of course, the UK column, the UK with, I know it's in the name, isn't it? The UK with the US in particular was pioneering the use of linguistics and applied behavioural psychology. The Americans did a lot because on their side of the pond, you had Cass Sunstein, who was one of the biggest guys behind it, but also you had the early work of Bandler and Grinder, who established neuro-linguistic programming. And NLP is still one of the key components that's being used by the British government in its applied behavioural psychology unit. And I think the other thing I should add to the audience is that, some people think, well, I'm too intelligent to be caught by this. And the irony of that statement is that if you're intelligent and you have an open, inquiring mind, you can actually be more vulnerable than somebody who's only interested in football and doesn't really absorb a wide band of information. So it's got to be taken very carefully. But so that we don't pull people into too bad a place, the defense against this sort of applied behavioral psychology as part of the information war is to be aware of it, that it's happening, and to do your own research to understand a little bit more what, for example, NLP entails. But I think as we look at society and we see people are behaving more and more strangely, it's like they're mesmerized. And sometimes even when you're trying to tell them simple facts, it's as though it's not that they're rejecting your information, it's as though they can't actually absorb what you're saying. They can't rationalize it. And of course, these sorts of problems with information coming in and rationalizing it inside the brain, if this doesn't work properly, then we get this effect called cognitive dissonance, where effectively there's conflict in belief structures in the mind. And this could make people seriously ill. It can make them depressed, certainly give them mental health issues, but it can actually make them physically sick as well. So I'll just end this bit, Jerm, but when we were in lockdown and the UK column, I'm going to say, was the leading outlet that revealed the use of applied psychology through the Spy B unit, which was the specialist unit inside SAGE, which was the gathering of scientists advising the government on the so-called COVID scam. They were advising the government to use more of this applied psychology to make people more fearful of the scam so that they would better adhere to the lockdown measures. And in the minutes of that particular meeting, which we broadcast several times, but when you get into look at the minutes, there was actually a caveat, a warning alongside the advice of ramping up the fear. And it was to do with communities. And it says, well, you've got to be careful because communities will start policing themselves, i.e. your friends and neighbours say, why aren't you wearing a mask? And if you don't wear that mask, they could turn on you. So it was astonishing to see that in that government scientific advisory paper, they were talking about making people more anxious and fearful, and that's a route, have to use the terminology, towards mental health problems, even suicides. And then they were also saying we need to be careful. And Britain and the US are leading this technology. The French were also involved because back in 2010, 2012, 2010 I mentioned because that's when the Cabinet Office Behavioural Insights document came out, which was called Mindspace. That's when the British government was boasting of being able to change people's minds. But shortly after that, we revealed that quasi-secret meetings had taken place between British officials and the French through the Franco-British Council, where French neuro-linguistic neurospecialists were actively planning a joint operation with their British counterparts. So this stuff is awash in society around us.
I remember when Matthias Desmet was on my podcast right back at the beginning of the whole era. And he said to be cautious of using the word psychosis. He said it's actually hypnosis. People are hypnotized, which is what you're alluding to. But here's what I don't understand, Brian. And I don't know if you know the answer, but so it's more of a rhetorical question, I guess. But how is it that some of us were able to see through it and many weren't?
The answer, well, let me say it's an important thing for me to say. We're talking psychology here, and I'm not trained in psychology. My only training is book learning experience and talking to people who are trained. So I want to put this across. But I think this is a fairly easy question to answer, and that is that it is a fact that in any human population, some people are more susceptible to hypnosis than others. So I many years ago up in Scotland, I went to see a stage hypnotist at work, and in a room of, I'm going to guess 150 people, he did some things, got people to put hands up in the air, and then out of people that he interacted with in that room. So initially he tried to react with everybody. And then he got a group of people who he identified because he said, put your left hand up in the air, your left arm. And he said some things, and he said, some of you won't be able to put your arm down. And sure enough, there was a group of people spread with their hands up. And then he walked around and tugged at their arm. And I think this was to give an indication of whether they were playing, maybe. And then out of those people, he selected some and they went up on the stage. And he didn't do anything cruel with them, but he did have them singing and doing things which I think they'd be quite embarrassed to see a video of themselves. But it was a real eye-opener for me. But it didn't affect me, but clearly it did affect other people. And when I've been able to talk to, I've been able to talk to a stage hypnotist myself in a telephone conversation about this sort of thing. And I've also recently again, been talking to people trained in NLP, and they all say that some people are easy to work with, some you can do a bit, but they have a little bit more resistance, and there is a small group of people who seem, for whatever reason, to be immune to it. But the NLP master that I interviewed recently, and he's desperately worried about what he sees as the political use of NLP. He said the key bit is that if you understand the sorts of things they do and say, that is great for helping protect you. But yeah, it's hypnosis. Sometimes I think it's also fair to call it mesmerism, but it's effectively taking people out of a proper, normal cognitive state and putting them into a highly susceptible, even trance-like state.
You made a comment earlier about intelligence, and something that stood out for me during the COVID era was the extremely low vaccine uptake here in South Africa. I think we were one of the lowest in the world, less than 1%, I believe. And that trend is quite far across sub-Saharan Africa. Now, if you go by the mainstream data, we are the dumbest people in the world. Yet, we are the ones who rejected en masse the pharmaceutical imposition.
Well, Jerm, I'm smiling, of course, as you say this, and because am I qualified to answer it? No, but my guess is that if you have people that are, how do we describe it, down to earth, you correct me if I'm wrong, because
uneducated, it's actually the term that everybody will use.
Well, maybe, I wouldn't use uneducated, because where I was coming to is that if you have a society where it's got a far greater proportion of people who are working with their hands, they're doing manual jobs, farms or whatever it is, their brains are attuned to what they're doing and they're working in a slower, more considered way. It seems logical to me that once the propaganda and the brainwashing and the reframing comes in, they don't take it in as the way that somebody who's working in a high-profile corporate job, who's being drowned in this stuff all the time, they just suck it up. But somebody who's in a farming community probably hears the words and says, what on earth are they talking about? And of course, that's a defensive mechanism. But that's my best guess.
I'm pointing that out because the term intelligence, I think, is only probably one piece of the puzzle. I think there's a lot more to it. I mean, I'm very happy that our vaccine uptake was so low. In fact, I'll go as far as saying that I'm very happy for the COVID years because it created critical thinking within me that I had previously not had. My own child is not vaccinated at all as a result. And had you asked me about vaccines in 2019, I would have said, of course, yes, they're necessary.
Yeah. Well, this is true. And of course, we've also, got a section of the community here in UK that have also made that decision. And that sadly, there are many people who perhaps have one vaccine. They were not quite convinced, but they weren't brave enough to reject it all. So they had one. And then they have watched family members and friends have apparently unexplained serious illnesses. They've died or they've had paralysis, all manner of things. And those people I really feel sorry for, because I can imagine they see the destruction that these vaccines have caused on friends and family. They're okay, but they've got it inside them and they can't get it out. And that I think must be a bit scary. It was one of the things when the battle was on over vaccinations and lockdown, I think it was one of the things which I really thought was excellent, that people who were absolute refuseniks, they were not going to have a vaccine at all, but they remained very calm and human with people who were vaccinated. So when the thing was over and we were let out of our cages, I think it was very encouraging that we saw people who'd seen through it did not then turn on people who'd had the vaccine and sort of say, "You idiot," and you're an idiot because you had the vaccine. They invariably addressed them in a much more of a calm, caring manner. And of course, this is very important because I think that has helped spread the message, stay away from these vaccines, to people who did actually have them in the first instance.
Now, I mean, I mentioned my kid a moment ago, and something that is related to my kid is school. It leads me to asking the question, what is the purpose of public schooling, or just schooling in general these days?
Well, I think that's an easy one because, the name is school, and fish form or marine creatures are in shoals. You're bringing people together in order to effectively reframe them into the same belief system. I don't think there's any doubt of that, and I've been very encouraged seeing the number of parents who have now decided to keep their children out of the school system and homeschooling them. It makes me, I'm now into grandchildren, so I can think of my own children, but I'm watching particularly what's happening with my grandchildren. And an example of why people really need to consider whether their children go to school to be taught by others that they have no idea who these people are or what their real views are. For me, the key one in the United Kingdom is religious and sex education, whereby very young children are being taught the most graphic sexual practices. And last weekend, I was in South Wales. I'd been invited to a little international conference for Public Child Protection Wales. This is a really exciting initiative where local mothers, mainly mothers, there's some dads involved as well, in South Wales, decided that they were going to challenge this sex education. They have tried to take the government in Wales to court. They lost, but nevertheless, they put a huge amount of pressure on. And they've now got it to the stage that they've qualified themselves to be able to go into schools and give lessons on why schools that adopt the government's own teaching package for religious and sex education are actually grooming the children because of the way they're teaching children about sex and the graphic sexual practices that are being put across. So I was really excited to see these women have taken it from just a local initiative in South Wales. They've now gone international. And at that particular event, there were speakers from the US and from New Zealand and from Ireland and England as well. But the key thing was that the education, the type of thing being taught, is the same in America, in New Zealand and UK in its graphic nature. And this tells you that the source of the policy is not coming from national governments, it's coming from beyond national governments. And of course, you don't have to go far. You're looking into UNESCO, but you can also see links through to the World Economic Forum and other non-governmental agencies. It's really interesting because as I talk about this, I want to say to the audience, do you really understand what they are teaching very young children? But it is so graphic that you then think to yourself, well, actually, some people are going to be offended if I say what they're teaching young children. And perhaps we can solve the problem by saying if people are curious about what I'm talking about, if they go to the UK Con website and look for the latest interview that I've done with a lady called Kim Isherwood, because I had a long, I think it was an hour and 20-minute interview with her about what is being taught. And we put the label on it, an adult conversation, because what we were describing was so graphic. And why are they doing this? They're doing it to absolutely destroy family life, the bond between the children and the parents. But also they are absolutely pushing towards a society where sex between adults and children is normal. So the children are being prepared for sexual relations with adults. I do talk about other things going on in the world, because there's all the wars, there's Ukraine and what's happening in Iran and everything else, and thousands of people being killed and maimed, and that's horrific. But when you come down to it, if we can't protect and nurture our own children, if the state is going to take those children and do what it wants with it, we don't have a future. We've already lost the battle.
I brought up the schooling because initially it came from the idea of schools wanting to vaccinate kids, but there's a whole host of problems, as you've pointed out. I remember interviewing an American woman, and I forget her name now, on UK Column last year, where she was talking about what American kids are being taught in schools, and it's disgusting. From choosing which gender you want to be, to dumbing the kids down. She points out, and she's got this whole collection of books from 120 years ago, and showing what kids were reading, in 1900 versus what kids are reading now.
Yeah.
And it's completely different. They were actually reading books with substance
and uplifting material.
Yes, and also big words. Today it's run, John, run. See, spot, jump.
Yeah. Well, but of course the whole thing is deliberate, Jerm, because we are being attacked. And I've found it easier and easier to say to people, if you do not understand government policy in any particular area, say it's confusing or it doesn't make sense, then try coming in at the angle that it is designed to harm you. You're being attacked. Look at it. Look at the policy through the lens that your own government is attacking you. And that often helps people come to terms with what the real agenda is. But the state wants the children, and it wants the minds of the children, and it wants to take the minds of the children into a place where most of us would never go as adults, let alone say it was suitable for the children. So yeah, this is really nasty stuff, and we've got to get amongst it and stop it.
A friend of mine said that he doesn't want his kid to be, or his kids to be schooled. He wants them to be unschooled.
Well, I think that's a reasonable thing to do. But
the problem, though, is that it gets difficult, though, within society.
Well, it does. But I will say, observing the children of people who are homeschooling, I think I would instantly say I found those children to be much livelier, so that they appear relaxed and they appear much more like children, whereas a lot of young children that go to school, they've got this vacant, depressed look on their faces. I can notice it locally where, because I live in a very rural area, there's a lot of children go to school on a coach, on a bus. And it's not often in the big group of children that you hear children's voices where they're chatting and laughing and joking. But that's the way it was. That's the way I remember it. But now you see, particularly young teenagers, they've all got a dour, sullen look about them. And I think this is because their minds are constantly being dragged into depressing material. They're under huge pressure in schools, and it shows. Whereas the homeschooled children are much brighter, and the other thing is they clearly have the ability to engage with adults in a much more, well, I could say mature, but you can be talking, as I was the other day, with a 7-year-old girl, and okay, we were talking about things which, commensurate with her age, but she was very lively in the discussion, and it was lovely. But of course, there were a lot of children that they're bizarrely taught all the sex, and then they're taught don't talk to adults. So if you're homeschooling, I think you've got an opportunity not only to put education in your child's minds, facts, real facts, and real learning that can help them, whether that's how to build something out of wood, or it's how to cook something, or how to clean something, or you can teach them all that. But also they're in a much more uplifting environment. And I think that's a powerful thing for those children.
Pink Floyd was sending us a warning back in the day.
Yeah, this is true.
I agree with you. I don't necessarily think that schooling creates intelligence.
Well, I don't believe it does, because in the majority of the schools in UK, children are clearly not being taught to think, or even how to think, how to look at material, how to search for material. They're just fed a rota subject, which they've got to learn in a rote form in order to get through an exam. And in a very light-hearted way, I can say that some time ago, I got the opportunity to go and visit Eton. So Eton, obviously known as one of the UK's top schools, where a lot of people who seem to attain positions of high power and influence in politics or commercially have gone to Eton with its significant annual fees and term fees. But it was a wonderful experience to go to the school and talk to not only the staff, but also to the boys, and there are some girls at Eton now as well, and to discover how much freedom they got within the Eton syllabus to really get into a subject and understand what it was about. And it was one of the things that I came away with thinking, well, when people say, why is it all these people that come out of Eton seem to do well? You could be completely cynical and say, well, that's just because they've got more money than other people. A lot of them have. But I think there's something else going on. I think that maybe this very prestigious teaching environment has been able to keep hold of how to teach people so that they can learn things for themselves and they can interpret information in the correct way. So they teach themselves how to learn. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the idea of doing your own research and learning on your own is in many ways superior to the 12 years, Brian, that you have to spend in school. What was the purpose of all of it? Is it really just to put the kids somewhere so the parents can go to work? And then while that's happening, get propagandized?
Yeah, I'm pretty confident that's exactly what's going on. And originally we didn't notice it so much because actually, there was a bit of a balance. So the children were being gently reframed, but they were still picking up knowledge and skill, which was good for them in later life. But I think we are now approaching the stage where they're coming out of school with very, very, very little. And where are they going then? You've got to go to university now.
Yeah.
So then they go in for another 3 years until,
they still can do nothing.
they can still do nothing, but they have a lot of them have a mindset of a child. I'm being a bit unkind to young people there, but actually they're fully adult. But they come out of university and then somebody else has got to train them up to be able to do a job. And of course, you see many academics complaining that we've now got to the stage where university students come out apparently with a degree, but they can't write properly. So the objective is the breakdown of children, of children's minds. What you want is a sort of mush that comes out of the school, because the state can control mush. It can't control people who think for themselves.
Over the last couple decades of UK column, have you found yourself, or have you found UK column to be over the target?
Yeah, many times, to the extent that, you know, our website has got 20 years worth of material on it. Actually, some of it, unfortunately, isn't there because, you know, as time in the early days, we didn't sort of meticulously capture everything we did. So some of our material isn't. But for the UK column team, if a subject comes up which we want to report in the news, or mainstream media is reporting it, and we think, where do we go to find information? We will go to search the UK column. We'll put the topic or subject or words into our search bar and see what news items and articles come up, and it's amazing what comes up. So yeah, I'm going to say we've been over the target so many times. We were over the target with Common Purpose in the very early days, which was a political charity still in existence that was clearly manipulating people, creating future leaders, and they were put in positions of power and influence in the country. That's now going on internationally. We were over the target with deep state operations, and basically the UK's security and intelligence services out of control in the way that they were carrying out operations in overseas countries. We've covered a lot of material about how dangerous the European Union was for the UK and still is. And in particular, we absolutely warned that the plan was to create a unified military structure in the European Union. And that was going to devastate the idea of a national government having its own armed forces under its control. And of course, the outcome of that policy has been that the European Union is left with a fragmented mess of military, because they tried to go down the route that the military of all the countries in the European Union would work together in partnership into forming a cohesive army or a navy or an air force under the European flag. And of course, they didn't achieve that, but the effort trying to force the military into that unified EU structure just resulted in the hollowing out of national military. And this is one of the reasons why you could see with the mayhem in the Gulf at the moment, there was no question of the European Union or even the UK putting proper military forces into the Middle East, because we don't have them anymore. They don't exist. Whatever you hear about the Royal Navy or the British Army, yeah, it's there. There are a few thousand men, but there's not enough to perform as a coherent military force. So that's been pulled apart. We got all that right. We also got COVID right. We got the attack on our minds right, that mind-space document and the Spy B. So there's a ton of stuff, Jerm, that we were bang on with.
I ask the question, obviously, because, as you know, and we won't get into it, but there has yet again been another series of attacks on UK column, on me even. And I am reminded of what Yuri Bezmenov said to G. Edward Griffin back in 1984 when he said that you subvert a society through a series of stages: demoralization, destabilization, and we see that happening. Now, it's no longer the establishment. During COVID, we had a unified enemy, and we all felt like we were on the same team. That's shifted now because there seems to be no single cause, as it were. And so now we find the opposition, quote unquote, fighting amongst itself. The opposition fighting amongst itself. Sorry, it's a singular, isn't it? So now we see the demoralization and destabilization happening within our own space. And that is very dangerous.
It's very dangerous, particularly as now we have a highly susceptible population. Post-COVID, people are in a really strange place because they're still on edge across the board. And people who are in we'll call it the truth movement. A lot of people say, I don't like that expression, but what's a better one? The activists, the people who can actually see at least something of what's coming down the pipeline. The activists, the truthers, are also very fragile at the moment because they've not only got the embedded stress of what was done to them during lockdown, they've got the added stress and anxiety of being able to see some pretty unpleasant and serious things coming into post, whether it's the attack on the minds of children or it's global corporations taking over medicine, which is the case in the UK with the NHS. The fact that old people are clearly now neglected and dying off, often alone, because the community and family support's all been destroyed. We've got the surveillance state coming in. All sorts of dark, nasty things are happening, and people who are awake to it and see it, if you don't look after yourself, this can pull you into a very dark place. And I can look at the camera. I can't quite see the audience, but I look at the camera and say that I have often had people coming to me and they say, actually, I'm struggling a bit trying to keep going and with all this happening. And I sometimes say to them, do you research a lot? And they say yes. And then I say, do you research at night? Oh, yes, sometimes I'm on my computer till 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. And I instantly say, stop it, because you research all this dark stuff. It does depress you. You research it at night, something even nastier comes out, which might be a different conversation, but I warn people about this. So the truth movement is very fragile because it's anxious, and therefore it only takes a little ripple for the suspicion to turn on other people who are actually only trying to do the same thing. They're trying to fight the beast. But you then get the truth movement looking in on itself and then ripping itself apart because everybody's become suspicious of everybody else. And this is sheer madness. And the other bit that goes with this for me is that many people, perhaps understandably, are still looking for simple solutions or explanations to a problem. So people in the UK, a lot of people are still very focused on the number of people coming in rubber boats. This is causing the problem in the country. In fact, the people coming in on rubber boats as migrants is a tiny fraction of the deliberately engineered immigration, which has been approved by government. Hundreds of thousands of people coming in under an approved system. It's just that you, the voter, you weren't taught about this. But for a lot of people who are active and now want to stop what they see as the deliberate breakdown of society, they'll focus on those boat people, or they will focus on the right wing, or they'll focus on the people who are attacking Zionism, or they'll focus on the Palestinians. And this, of course, is what the controlling class want, because every time people stay at local political level picking their target, the people who are controlling all the puppets can keep moving the pieces on the board. So for me, it's very important that while people are discerning, you look at other people doing things, and you're going to, technical term, you're going to do your due diligence and say, well, who are these people and why are they doing it? It has to be done with care, because the present environment can lead people very quickly to become overly suspicious of somebody else just because they don't know much about them. And I must say, Jerm, that I've been very saddened over the last, I'll say, month to see all of a sudden people raising questions, not only about the UK column, but about other people who are established and have been trying, to fight the system for a great many years. I call them the new kids on the block. They've suddenly come in. They, perhaps a bit understandably, they think they're the only ones. They're the first to really understand what's going on. But I'm sat here, and to my right, I've got quite a long bookshelf. I got a lot of books. And the thing I know is that amongst those books are really brilliant works that were done by people many, many years ago, well before I woke up. So I think there's a need for a certain humility with anybody who considers themselves a warrior or an activist against the technotronic system of government, that if other people are fighting, you might not agree with the areas that they're trying to fight. You might not agree with how they're doing it, but you need to respect the fact they're fighting, because the only way we are going to win this battle is by humanity coming together to support each other. And it doesn't matter what age you are, it doesn't matter what color your skin is, it doesn't matter what religion you are. The one world ruling system will have us all in the camp. So we need to show real respect and humility for people, and not get into this rapid fire labeling that this person is a bad person or that person is a bad person, simply on hearsay and slurs. It's very frustrating because, as you know, you've built up your podcast. It takes a lot of work to build something, and it's really quite easy to destroy things. That's why the system we're fighting is such a disastrous system, because really it can't create anything, it can only destroy. And if we end up with a truth movement falling into this frame of mind, we lose. So, yeah.
A good example of the subversion you're talking about is 9/11. Obviously, the mainstream establishment narrative is nonsense. Now, instead of fighting against that, we have all this bickering within the opposition of that. And as a result, they are doing the work of the establishment.
Well, that's absolutely correct. And it's really sad to see. I've got a selection of books on 9/11 on my bookshelf. One of them is Judy Wood's book, which is a fantastic piece of work, and I've read it. I look at 9/11, and for me, it makes more sense. Let's come in at the angle. I have never believed, and nobody would convince me, that an airliner going into structures that were built that strong would collapse them in the way that they collapsed. For me, it's more logical to look at the controlled demolition. However, I respect people who say on the evidence they've collected they believe it was a directed energy weapon. I would say to that, okay, well, let me see what you're talking about, and that's when it gets a bit blurry. But to fight amongst ourselves over some things that you can't actually prove or disprove is just ridiculous. And of course, what does the hidden hand of the globalist agenda do? Well, it makes sure it injects people into these forums in order to stir the pot and keep the infighting going, because while people are fighting inside the pot, they're not fighting the real battle around them. So it's very sad to watch it.
Something you said to me a few days ago has absolutely taken root. And it went something along the lines of, you like to take people at face value. And that's a very profound statement, because what it suggests is that you first see the good before you see the bad. And what we're seeing around us it's the inversion of that. Everybody is bad and can't be trusted, and we must approach them with suspicion. And that's a horrible place to be. It's very dark.
It's very dark, and it's very damaging, because human beings are supposed to be social beings that are working together, as man and woman, or men or women working together wherever it is, or families or wider society. For me, it was something where, again, this was after the Navy, when I was starting to see things and talk out and give public talks and things. But very early on, I can remember people saying, oh, well, Peter's doing talks on whatever it is, but, oh, he's doing this or he's doing that. And then in would come this little bit of suspicion. It might even be a little bit of a smear. And I know there were times when I was uncertain about, I was uncertain of a person, and maybe I didn't make the phone call or I didn't send the email. But then I came to realize that this was a really bad way of approaching things. And a much better way is that when somebody sends you an email or calls you, or you meet them for the first time and you talk to them, you start from the position that the person talking to you is a decent human being, and that their intentions are correct, and you deal with them on that basis. If subsequently they prove to you that that's not correct, then obviously you're justified in changing the way you deal with them. But we've got to the pathetic statement now where people are trying. Well, years ago they were saying to me, well, you can't talk to people who've are migrants because they're the enemy. And I'm thinking, well, actually, the ones I've talked to have been really lovely people. And one gentleman in particular, with the name Mohammed, helped me when I needed medical help. He was a specialist consultant, and I have every reason to be grateful to him. So I wasn't going to be swayed with this. And then you get them, well, you mustn't like this person because they're Jewish, or they're Iranian, or they're Chinese, or they're Russian. This is madness, because within any nation on the earth, to label it, if we're a little bit crude, to label the nation by the crimes of the government is unbelievably short-sighted. You talk to people who've done a lot of world travel. I've done a reasonable amount in my time in the Navy, and I can't think of anywhere I went to where I stepped off the boat and met horrible people. Whether it was, whether it was Italy or Greece or Portugal or South Africa or Somalia, Turkey. I met lovely people. Were there bad people in those locations? Of course. But if you start out believing that everybody who approaches you has got some sort of agenda, I think this takes you towards a psychosis. And you don't want that. And you start out by treating other human beings as you'd like them to treat you. I think that's the right way.
I'm looking at the time, and I normally use an analogy like, let's come in for a landing or let's do the final lap. But since you were in the Navy, let's come in to dock.
Or come into the harbour. Yeah.
There we go. Have you been to my side of the pond?
To your side, South Africa? Yes. I hesitate to say when I was there, though. I think, because I had a visit to Port Elizabeth and also to Cape Town. I would have guessed it would probably have been about 1973, if you can.
Oh, yeah, that was during
that sort of time.
So that's during apartheid.
And absolutely, and that was quite an experience, and one that I've got to say, Jerm, I really didn't like. I found it very uncomfortable. But,
well, I mean, I grew up in it. It was quite different, yes, to what it is now.
Yeah, but
you need to come back though, Brian.
Well, I'd like to. I still remember the sunshine and Cape Town and Sugarloaf. Is it? Yeah, I have these memories of being there, and when we were in Port Elizabeth, we were taken out by a very kind family in some sort of wagon, and we did a little bit of sightseeing in the countryside, and I can almost picture that, being on the rough dirt road and bumping over the ruts and seeing a bit of South Africa.
Well, I'm not allowed to say this, but it's a beautiful day here and the sky is blue. There are no chemtrails.
Well, it's not too bad here, actually. The sun is shining and everything else. Jerm, what do we leave the audience with a real...
This is what I was going to ask you. Okay, so in this conversation, we've mainly covered the information wars, speaking about kids and vaccines and, of course, psychological, all quite dark. But I guess my question to you is, what is the moral of the story then?
What's the moral of the story? Well, for me, that's an easy one, because spending enough time looking at it, to me, the only explanation as to what we're facing is that we're in a spiritual battle. And if you accept that we are fighting principalities and powers way beyond the human mind and politics, then you've got to start looking at spiritual guidance and scripture to say what the solution is. And I think this can be very uplifting, because I think the reasonable position for a believer, I'm choosing that word rather than saying a Christian, which I consider myself to be, is that when you accept quite happily that there's a much higher power, we will call that God, that exists, it puts you as a mere mortal in your place, but also it tells you that you are only a foot soldier and the real battle is being controlled at a much higher level. So don't be fearful, and don't think that everything these mad politicians is doing is going to control what the outcome is, because the outcome is being controlled, I believe, by a spiritual power and identity that actually mankind can't fully grasp. We think we're very intelligent and we think we've got huge intellect, but we haven't. So Scripture provides a certain comfort that there is somebody, a loving God, which is looking after people. And this also provides us with the right guidance as to how we should deal with other people, because we're still allowed to fight. We're certainly allowed to fight to protect ourselves and our family. But in general, we should be approaching other people with humility and love and kindness, because that develops the right world. And that's why the technocratic worldview is trying to destroy proper spirituality and religion. So I think it's recognize there is a loving God and try and emulate that in how you approach other human beings.
before we go any further, I just remembered now what it is you were asking me about. It's Signal Hill. It's the lower mountain next to Table Mountain. Sorry, I didn't know that you were.
No, you've given me the answer. Table Mountain. It didn't come to me. It's Table Mountain. I was trying to think. So all your South African viewers are going to think I'm a complete numpty, but it was a long time ago, and I haven't looked at the map.
Sorry, yeah. When you were trying to describe it, I thought you were referring to a higher piece of land or something that is part of the greater city. And we have something called the High Veld and the Low Veld and all that. But what you're referring to is Signal Hill, which is it's a sort of lower mountain that's connected to Table Mountain. I'll tell you a quick little bit of history about Signal Hill. Did you know that it has a cannon that goes off every single day at 12 o'clock, and it has been going off every single day at 12 o'clock since 1806. It's called the Signal Hill Noon Gun. Did you know that?
I didn't know that, Jerm. So thank you very much for sharing that to me. And you've done something.
Well, let me just quickly tell you the reason. Yeah, the reason is because it had to do with, it was obviously a time signal, and it was designed in the UK. And its purpose was to obviously alert, at that time, the very small city about what was going on. Well, it became a time signal, but it was initially obviously a warning sign. So it's been religiously firing every single day since 1806.
Wow. That is very nice. And of course, this is one of the things that basically an important thing in Scripture is that we should respect history and historical markers. We shouldn't remove those from life. They're something to be properly treasured because they take us back to our roots. So for that gun to be going since 1806, did you say? Yeah, yes. That's really amazing.
And in case somebody asks, no, it's not actually firing a cannonball or anything. It's firing blanks, obviously. Yeah. Imagine if it was firing a cannonball every day.
That'd be quite interesting. Yeah. No,
all right.
That's really great. But
on that note, Brian Gerrish.
Jerm, I wanted to say to you, because I think it's nice to be able to do it publicly, that we are really delighted that you've come on board with the UK column. And, your approach to interviews and the subjects you cover is really good. Of course, you're younger. This is a huge advantage. Okay, get the average age of the UK column down. And, we do have to work hard, as you know, but we also do have to fight our corner, and we also have to fend off these attacks. So, yeah, I'm going to say, as part of the UK team, I'm sad that you've had to come under this pressure and these crazy accusations as to what, that we've got some ulterior motive. But yeah, it's been all part of the game over the years. So you give it a good ignoring and get up in the morning and go on.
Well, thank you, Brian. It's an absolute pleasure working with you. And since you so rudely interrupted my ending, let me try that again. Brian Gerrish, thank you for joining me in the trenches.